Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is the second in a 5-part series of our 2020 Payments Law Virtual Bootcamp, co-hosted by Venable and MAC, the Merchant Acquirers Committee. Today we're going to talk about managing processing risks in the time of COVID. I'm going to introduce all of our panelists in just a second, but I did want to remind everybody about the lineup this week. If you missed yesterday, registrants are able to access a video recording of our really great panel that we had on legislative issues. We talked about how the payments industry stepped up when COVID began and the impact of the CARES Act and other initiatives in Congress impacting the economy and the industry that we all, play a very critical role in with payment processing. Tomorrow we're going to focus on law enforcement activity. And there's a lot of activity in that space. Thursday, we've got our international panel, and Friday, we're going to talk about new areas of growth. Each of the panels is at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. But back to today, we're going to guide you through the next almost an hour on, again, managing processing risk. So I'm going to ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves. Let me start with Dina Rich.
Hi, thank you, Ellen, and thanks for having me on your panel. My name is Dina Rich. I am co-CEO and co-founder of Infincept, Payment Facilitator in a Box. We help SaaS companies and ISVs who want to include payments in their software, and also we help you understand how to be a payment facilitator, policies and procedures, rules and regulations. And I've been doing this in the industry for about 30 years now, and of payment facilitators for the last 10 or so.
Okay, thank you. Let's move next to
Javier. So I'll throw it over to Barry next.
Thanks, Dina. My name is Barry Van Brackle. I'm co-head of the FinTech practice at Oric and head of the payments group. And I'm just going to cop to knowing Dina, let's just say, for her first company. So I've been doing payments for a while. And I guess, fun fact, when the banks got consent from Visa and MasterCard to spin off ISOs, and Dina, you were probably involved with one of the first ISOs. We worked on one of the first ISOs. So I've been also doing this a good long time.
Okay, and I'm Javier Robles. And Ellen, thank you for promoting me. I'm not the chief at FIS, but definitely was at WorldPay. So I've been with WorldPay a little over a year, acquired by FIS, now the biggest fintech company in the world, and an acquirer. And I spent a lot of time in the last year working on a robust amount of regulatory and compliance issues, including those that we're going to cover today. Before that, I spent some time, almost 10 years at First Data and its subsidiary Western Union. And I also worked for Amex for almost 4 years and MasterCard. So I've been around the payments block a couple times, and happy to be here with you.
Oh, that was a well-deserved promotion that we'll put in a good word for. So thank you all. All right, so we're going to talk today about managing risk. And the way I always think of it is financial risk of loss. But I also think about reputation risk, consumer protection risk. So we're going to go through sort of the full spectrum here, starting with what you see up now, just sort of what happened. It seems like overnight. I know we had some maybe some build up to COVID hitting the United States, and certainly it's a global impact to business. But we all of a sudden have businesses shutting down. We're changing what we're doing, what we're rushing in the stores to buy. We're walking one way through grocery stores. We're now ordering food online. I can't tell you how happy I was that our little bakery got a website up really quickly and was able to take online orders. But things really changed in the payments industry. Was right in the middle of it because we're critical. We make the money flow. So I'm curious from each of your perspectives, and they're all very different. And serving clients or your own internal clients, when the phone started ringing, what were some of the some of the issues that you were hearing, some of the concerns and questions that really impacted you especially from a risk perspective. So Javier, I'd love your inside company perspective first.
I think the first immediate issue were more on the privacy side. Like, in other words, how can we continue to operate, especially our call centers, outside and working from home? We make a lot of effort to avoid even phones being present in the call centers to make sure we're protecting customer privacy. Huge, and continues to be a big issue to resolve, but it made us, I think it was one of those first aha lessons where, you know, the right architecture could have avoided a lot of problems. But that was the first. And I think later on we had a lot of requests, and I know we're going to get to this, but a lot of requests for new merchant types and new merchants related to COVID testing. And, you know, with the FTC, the FDA kind of loosening its rules, we had a lot of interesting requests, some of which we came to you with, Ellen, to ask about. But yeah, okay. Those were the immediate risk. We have the FTC file.
Okay. Okay, great. And I will say, everybody, just bear with us if our connections are not always the greatest here, but we're going to keep going and with that. And let me go over and take it to Dina next.
Sure, and I'll try not to dance to whoever's phone that is as I'm over. But you are, please feel free to do it. What I can tell you is that one of the first calls I got, as mentioned, I've been in the industry a day or two, were from clients that maybe weren't even current clients, but that knew me from the past or dealt with me before, wanting fitness reviews, wanting to make sure they understood what they should be doing. So ISOs and payment facilitators saying, how do I know that I am doing the right thing and watching the right items in my portfolio? And the other thing that we got calls from the software side was, yikes, what do I look for? So we immediately added a whole bunch of new keywords to draw out applications for manual review, things you might not have otherwise seen or thought about before. So those were the first two things when this blew up, if you will.
Okay. Barry, you've got a wide client base, so what were they asking?
Yeah, so, and it's wide, so bear with me. So obviously, with respect to a bank, their risk has in effect been defined, or the core elements of managing risk are as set forth by the FDIC, FFIEC, or the OCC. And so the risk assessment, policies and procedures, due diligence, and the oversight, that should have been in place. But what we had discussed there is how to beef up the ongoing oversight to make sure that basically sort of twofold. A merchant that says that they're selling, let's just say X, is in fact selling X as opposed to Y. So that's number one. And then we also made sure that we changed the parameters of looking for high activity. For example, lots of returns, lots of chargebacks. You know, I'm not saying that those things obviously don't happen, but when they spike and you're not necessarily in an industry that should have a lot of chargebacks or returns, that may be grounds for will increase scrutiny. So that's on the bank, on the payment facilitator, on the merchant of record side, when you're dealing with either a horizontal or a vertical merchant flow, or you have the financial oversight. And as I said, those are your regulatory parameters. A lot of the ISOs and a lot of the payment facilitators that I've dealt with are worried about, frankly, risk and losses. And they represent people in the hospitality industry, which has certainly suffered. We represent, you know, at ORIC, we have a big tech practice. It's, Ellen, I know you do too. And the tech providers were all of a sudden, they had wanted to be integrated via software into systems, and all of a sudden their perceived flow of end users had significantly dropped off. On the merchant side, we were asked to assess various items that, let's just say, had FTC concerns, masks that were purported to be from, let's just say, Y, were in fact not from there, or that they were touted as being protective equipment were indeed, cloth masks. So we had country of origin issues and false claims issues. So it kind of did run the gamut.
Yeah, you're right. And I remember, I think my first couple weeks at home were the busiest ever because there was so much going on, so much with.
Ellen?
Okay, so Ellen has popped out, so maybe we don't hear her voice. So I'll go ahead and take over and comes back in. What she's put up on the next slide does talk about refunds and credit disputes. I see her talking. Maybe the tech people can tell her that.
Yeah, maybe it's a connectivity issue.
Okay, yep, she's gone. Okay, so let's talk about the refunds and credit disputes. I know that we see lots of companies giving credits, and I even saw one of the people that I work with had some tickets to a play for May, or for March, I'm sorry, and they canceled it, and the replacement tickets were December 2021. So that's not going to fly and will cause a chargeback. So, I know that one of the things that we saw is, or in one of the presentations I did, I had a banker who talked about working with his ISOs like that so that the decision wasn't made to put it so far out in the future that the client would automatically charge back, but to find some better ways around that. So Javier, you might have seen some things that your merchants were doing that were creative to avoid chargebacks because their changes or fixes were so far in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was what happened to us, I think, and is still happening, is it's hard to distinguish the difference. In other words, what's causing the high chargebacks? You can see the programs, you can see the names hitting, and then the question is, what's the narrative? Is it something that's actually explainable because travel has collapsed, or the format in training has gone from in-person to online and people are dissatisfied with that change? Or is there something more sinister, or is there something underlying that? As we can tell from all the FTC enforcement letters, are there people that are dissatisfied because they were secure or selling something else that wasn't working very well? So it's hard. It really started to clutter, I think, the system. And I agree, it took weeks, and I think we're still at it, trying to distinguish between what might be an explainable chargeback and someone that you just want to manage through the program as compared to outright fraud.
Yeah. With respect, and Dina, I'll just jump in here. It also pertains to whether a chargeback or a refund is appropriate is this. What was the disclosure to the customer? What do I have the right to expect? If I want to return something or it never got fulfilled, if my terms and conditions say we're not going to give you money back, you're only going to get a credit, unless you're in a regulated industry such as the airlines, that may just fly, if you will. But if you are, for example, if you have tickets for a play and they say we're not going to give you your money back for the play, but we'll get you to the next available time frame, and you had those terms and conditions in advance and you knew that, then I would say that there is an argument that the merchant has that they should not suffer the chargeback because that's what the customer expected. If, on the other hand, there is a total lack of fulfillment, for example, you were going to see a show and that show they're just deciding it's just not going to go, then that should be, you should be entitled as an end user, as a customer, to the refund, frankly. And if they don't get a refund, that would become the credit dispute. But we just frankly do have to discuss the, if you will, the dirty little secret, which is, so for example, I had tickets, I had to go to Europe. And it was just for a very short trip. It was a business trip, very short. I was going to leave on a Saturday and come back on a Wednesday. Direct flights, no problem. I got an email from the travel agent yesterday saying, well, you're going to be routed through, some other place, and you're going to sit in the airport for 8 hours, and then you can come back maybe in, 6 days beyond what you wanted. I said, you know what? I can't do that. That's not according to the terms of carriage. So they are agreeing to refund me, but the dirty little secret is they're having a cash flow issue, as most airlines are. So it's a question of when you will get your refund. But again, this is a regulated industry, the airline industry, and they are required to give these refunds. And maybe, I don't know if Ellen can hear or if she can weigh in, but the hospitality industry is certainly going through, I think, some creativity in this space. I know that some are pivoting. Some tech companies are maybe pivoting, and others maybe like VRBO or others are doing super well. I don't know that. We're not obviously here to comment on that part, but I'd be interested to know. And I don't know if Ellen or Dina or Javier, if if the hospitality companies, how they're handling this. I mean, because they're not as, they're not regulated by the airline industry, and they arguably do have a terms of use. And if you cancel in a given time frame, do you get the refund? Are they giving refunds? I'm throwing that out there to you guys.
This is a good check to see if I'm back. So a thumbs up.
Okay, yes, we can hear you. So Ellen, Ellen, maybe that's a good segue for you, because I know you work with the FTC a lot. So the question is on the hospital, we talked about the airline industry, they're regulated, and the agreement from the FAA basically says that you refund, you cancel a trip, you refund. But we were just talking about the hospitality industry. How does that, and is there a cash flow issue?
Yeah, look, I think we're in really uncharted territory here. And I think something that we're going to talk about in a second, the FTC, but we're going to talk about it more so with some of the newer products, newer fraud that we're seeing. I think if you're dealing with a mainstay industry like hospitality, hotels, even cars, beach houses, whatever it is, I think those companies are going to want to play fair with their customer base, and they've got a lot in the calculation. I mean, they've got their own financial risk of loss to face. They'll probably see if they can, rather than refunds, are people interested in credits or discounts or something. So there's probably a lot of creativity happening and a lot of leeway, frankly, to be creative. Unfortunately, there probably will be lawsuits because consumers just get very upset. The slide that's up now that I started to talk about was just dozens of lawsuits from just disgruntled people who couldn't get their $15 back for a couple months when they couldn't use whatever service. So, Javier, did you want to say something? No, you're good. Okay.
No, I'm good. I'm reading along. Thanks.
Okay, so let's keep going, and hopefully I'll stay here with you all, not leave again. But we did talk a little bit about the new market entrants, and it's interesting. On the one hand, I think there's a rush to produce masks and hand sanitizers, and frankly, good paper towels that actually absorb and not spread would be wonderful. I would look for that out there, but but there's also some very legitimate services. So something like telemedicine. I mean, doctors' offices quickly pivoting to telemedicine. And how do you get those set up? How do you make sure that they're okay? We're not actually now supporting some sort of an online pharmacy that we can't, really support. So this might be a good one, Javier. Maybe some of these more traditional in-person card-present businesses moving to an online space. how would you deal with that?
Yeah, and I think there's more to understand and unearth. You have restaurants that have become markets. And then you do have the doctor's office that wants to do telemedicine or has to do it. Mental health offices that would have in-person sessions but doing it online. Well, it's a different profile than what they opened up with. So I still think there's a lot of remedial work to be done on these files that have changed a lot. But on telemedicine specifically, we and most of our sponsor banks had either a prohibition or a restriction on that, mostly because it's a slippery slope from, a doctor's office that's literally trying to help a patient as compared to an online pharmacy that's just trying to sell their specific medicine. And they didn't, a lot of the banks don't have a lot of appetite for it. So we worked hard to build out, and kind of address the ongoing drumbeat of doctors want to get online, and different services that are trying to address the massive demand to avoid going into an office. So we cobbled together a form to try to do onboarding. We skipped right from policy to a questionnaire, trying to address the very issues of concern. And we were lockstep with our sponsor bank, one of our sponsor banks, that was skittish. But as we walked through it, they saw both the need and they kind of lean in and try to address the space. So we were able to tackle that and get our first telehealth. We changed the name to telehealth to kind of argue and kind of signal we don't want to be doing pharmacy and online prescriptions, but we do want to be helping doctors get to patients. So it was a good scramble, and it was and now we have a new sector that our salespeople are leaning into.
Javier, can I interrupt? I have a question. I have a client that is doing telehealth, but they didn't have the technology or the connectivity to actually do or get to their patients. So they have a software provider that's actually interfacing with them. So have you had questions, and maybe Dina, this goes to you, as to who actually is the merchant here and who is actually interfacing with the customer or the patient, I guess, in this case?
Yeah, I think it's better for Ellen. I can tell you right now that that's a constant problem. We're looking for doctors' offices, and we get technology companies saying, hey, I have an app that can fix that. And of course, we're back to saying, well, is it an app? Is it money transmission issues? Are there PayFac issues? What's going on? And what are the relationships? Right. So we're constantly dealing with that, which keeps me busy and employed. So it's good. It's good kind of work. But yeah, those are great questions. And those are some of the things that we're tackling now. Is the app that's trying to get doctors together is different than a multi-state doctor's office, right? They're just and so we're looking for the latter. But of course, eventually we want to figure out how to help those technology companies get it right.
And this frankly probably goes
compliant.
Yeah, and this probably goes to the beginning of it as to the risk assessment. And even though you have policies and procedures, et cetera, I mean, maybe the first question is, who are you entering into a contract with? Who is the merchant? Not just, even though they're maybe providing in this situation telehealth or telemedicine, are they actually doing it? Is it for a third party? What are the privacy and PHI or other concerns under HIPAA that may exist? I'm just throwing out that our standards, like I said, FFIEC, FDIC, OCC standards for evaluating risk, for monitoring third party relationships that we've always considered, are getting sort of pivoted into ways that you just didn't consider let's just say, February.
And I'm also wondering, Dina's perspective from maybe payment facilitator perspective too.
Yeah, Ellen, that's just what I was going to say, is you really have to follow the money. Where is it going? You have flows. You have an information flow and a money flow to really figure out if it's a true payment facilitator or if they're simply in the background being a software provider, not touching the money. And then if they are a payment facilitator, where do they fit within the rules? Because the rules were certainly not written for a post-COVID-19 world. They were written for pre-COVID-19. So then you need to make sure you're bringing in the right bodies to help you understand. There are approved companies like NAVP and LegitScript who can then look at what's happening and help you understand if they're allowed to do what they're doing. And then if they're not, do you go get a variance? Because again, we're post COVID-19. And I think we really have to not only look outside of the box, but hopefully it's cardboard and we can just remove some of the sides of our box so we can make it happen.
I just want to point one more thing out, and I think this is a little bit later in the presentation. The states are not sitting back. The states, because all this, because as you point out, Dina, you have to look at the money flow and also the information flow. But there are money transmission issues if someone who does not have either the right, who is either a non-money transmitter or who is not a bank or who is not maybe under some exemption under either federal or state law. And if they're all of a sudden in the money or
set up facilitator with
active right
FBO.
Sorry?
Oh, I said, or not a payment facilitator set up with the proper FBO account. That's also one.
Right, like I said, without the proper protections in place or protections that work. But states are, I would have thought, frankly, March 1, that maybe the states are not going to be as aggressive, but I'm not thinking that anymore. The states are just this, I mean, they're still looking at it. They're still tracking the money. They're still tracking the information flow, and they're still writing lots of inquiry letters.
Well, the states are going to have funding issues. So what better way for the states to get money than to really dive into this? They're going to hurt just like the rest of the industry.
Right.
And
no, there's definitely, I don't disagree.
Well, it's also about consumer protection, right? So one of the other things the states, especially the state AGs, are very concerned with is, are these coronavirus-related telehealth companies popping up real, or are they telling you to gargle with Clorox? So what are they really doing, and what's happening to the consumer? And so the states are going to dive in where that's concerned, let alone the FTC and the CFPB, who will also be doing that.
Well, and I mean, the medical boards. I mean, if you're being told to gargle with Clorox, which maybe we've heard before, that just is, kind of ridiculous. And so hopefully they're being monitored. But again, if you I keep on drilling back to the outset of this, which we're talking about risk and policies and procedures. And frankly, the banks are subject to KYC with respect to opening an accounts. And from our standpoint, for third-party processors, we really do need to know not KYC by KYM and really understand, is the person who is providing the services all who they say they're going to be, and appropriately either registered or licensed or regulated, right? And
so let me
go ahead.
Yeah, let me pick up on that, because this leads us into sort of our next big chunk, because I don't know if this is a good play off of gargling Clorox or what, but the FTC and the states, they'll be tracking fraud-related complaints, and some of these numbers are really staggering. And there's let me flip to the next slide real quick. This is on the FTC's website. They've been tracking complaints. These are the ones we pulled as of June 2nd, but you can see about 62,000 complaints that are related to some product or service for COVID. And they're also tracking the dollar value, the consumer spending that is potentially lost on products that appear to be fraudulent. So this is a big deal. And I'll just flip back for a second. These are some of the bigger categories. Travel and vacation, although I'm not so sure those are probably more along the lines of refund and cancellation issues. Yeah. Well, maybe less than the scammy stuff. But online shopping is probably where we're seeing the masks and counterfeit masks and hand sanitizers and whatever else may or may not work. And then the mobile phone, mobile text, whatever else. But, you know, the point I mentioned the session tomorrow, we're going to talk about law enforcement activity, and we're going to go through a few cases tomorrow, especially some of the recent FTC cases. But the FTC cases, and there's no harm in making this point twice today and tomorrow, they look back in time. So as a processor, if you end up with one of these merchants in your portfolio and you haven't done enough to sort of figure out what they're doing, that they're not who they say they are, or that they got approved to sell shoes and now they're selling some fake mask that doesn't do anything or doesn't work, or making claims about it, and you're not carefully looking for it, you're not monitoring, or especially if you turn a blind eye, you think that they're doing it, but they're so profitable and maybe processing so much that you let them go anyway. It's those types of cases that many years later really could come back to bite you. So there is, you know, the FTC has been sending out warning letters. There's announcements weekly. We're seeing it feels like, and they're in huge chunks. This slide says over 100 letters. I think we've probably gotten closer to 200 letters, it feels like, even in the last week with a new batch. And these are issues with unsupported claims about the effects of some of these products. There are some cases, or warning letters, I should say, involving multi-level marketing. So, and this is what a warning letter looks like, by the way. It's just, you know, it can get out, the FTC can get out a warning letter very, very quickly. They need authority to, from the commissioners to sort of initiate an investigation and go the long road. But warning letters can go out very quickly. There's product claims. Here's some examples here. How to boost your immune system, antiviral mushrooms. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of this. Here's the letters from this past week on the multi-level marketing. There was a big announcement about a round of letters, a second round of letters, and these ones went to multi-level marketing because people have, you know, unfortunately lost jobs and are very vulnerable to these types of things. So let me segue then, any of you, but maybe starting with Dina. You know, I know you've helped businesses with underwriting, and we do too, to the extent we're saying you got to really dig. And maybe digging isn't even that deep. If you just start searching on Google or searching BBB complaints or an online reputation, or sort of even just looking at the address that somebody filled out and looking at the screenshot of it and realizing it's somebody's like little apartment somewhere and it's not a legit business. But like, are there tips or lessons we can learn from sort of high risk merchant underwriting from the past that we should be applying to some of these newer things now that are coming out?
Sure, high risk underwriting 101, if you will. I will say,
Yes.
I've seen with the Y addresses still on them. So if you don't remember that, a while ago we saw the scam. There's where a company in Wyoming, same address, who will help set up multiple shell corporations, and it's all at this same address, and still seeing that out there. So to your statement, Ellen, comparing addresses, comparing phone numbers. The bigger thing here, though, is we all do frictionless. That's not going to change just because we're in COVID. What we do have to change is what kicks out to be manually reviewed, and that we have proper keywords set up for that, and then that we do real underwriting on the websites, real searches on the phone numbers. We use companies, the merchant monitoring service providers, that can assist us with those things, who can get behind and compare even the way wording is written on a website to compare it to others, and not just a WordPress comparison, but you can see the way the bad guys compare. The other thing your system can do is compare like addresses for large groupings, when groupings come in. Maybe you to the gaming world, where they use some great geolocation tools to make sure you're not getting hit with a bot army for some of these. Maybe that's how they're coming through, and it's really just one person with 50 or 100 accounts rather than a true MLM making bogus claims. And we just saw two recently settlements from the FTC come out based on these bogus claims and consumer harm. And it really is about understanding, not just enjoying the large margins, but making sure you know how those margins are made so you can properly assess the risk you and your company, specifically Ellen, because it's not going to be just, as you said, which is why it's not going to be in a month or 2 months. It's going to be in 2 years when you have to pull back and you're trying to figure out, why did I do this? Oh my gosh, I was rushing, or oh my gosh, my head was somewhere else, so I didn't properly review. And then once the money came in, well, I couldn't give it up. That's really something we need to pay attention to.
I just want to interject. Don't forget, Visa and MasterCard's rules still require that if a merchant is onboarded, that there's a site visit done. And there's always pushback whenever that appears in agreement. Oh, that's only when there were feet on the street and everything is virtual, blah, blah, blah. And, sites, the site visits, if you go through the regs, are what's appropriate for the type of business. So all what you are describing, and it is simply required to do business and to accept Visa or MasterCard branded cards.
So,
two things there. If it's a payment facility. Well, I was just going to say it's when feasible, and with a payment facilitator, MasterCard doesn't require the site survey, and site survey substitutes are very acceptable. So it's getting a good site survey substitute, not just a Google search.
Well, no,
okay.
I don't disagree, except for don't forget, somebody enters into the agreement with the payment facilitator to begin with, and then the payment facilitator agrees to adhere to the rules with respect to either the sub merchants or the sponsored merchants. So, you can't just say, oh, as you say, I didn't know and too much money came in. I mean, there's still onboarding obligations, and those are, again,
absolutely.
If you will, on or not, you've got, you could have pass-through obligations for the banks. And I've seen a lot of banks pass through BSA and KYC obligations.
So let me step back for a second. Okay. I am remiss. I need to take a quick pause for the attorneys who have dialed in and are looking for the CLE credit. I'm going to read your code right now, and it will also be pushed out to you, I believe, but the code is RISK 2020, RISK 2020. So I did not want to forget to do that, but I did want to jump back actually to the warning letters, and we'll continue talking about underwriting and monitoring for the rest of the time here. But I want to go back to Javier for a second, because not every company is the same. Not every warning letter is really the same. And I'm curious, if one of your merchants gets a warning letter, what is the reaction? And I would imagine there's a spectrum of potential reactions, and it might depend on who the merchant is, how long have they been doing business with you. Maybe you go to them and ask them to explain themselves, or maybe you're immediately getting them off of your portfolio. But what are some of the factors? What are the reactions, and sort of what are some of the factors you might consider in taking some action?
I think all of those things, and then running around in a circle yelling, usually all help. But it's we have a risk-based, onboarding program, and when we like to lean into high risk when it makes sense, right? We're always looking at, okay, how do the MLMs, for instance, manage their independent consultants? How are casinos? We have a robust program. We have a huge portfolio, and how do we get that right? And so I think we have a great onboarding process and a good monitoring process. Nonetheless, you get the FTC has been so busy, and several of our merchants have been caught up. We monitor those very carefully, and then we have done everything from just terminate immediately, just because the allegations could be so severe. And then when we look at the merchant itself, we don't see them as sophisticated enough to fix it or address it, and so we will terminate. If we think that the size of the merchant or the type of allegation is something that might have an explanation, we do send a request to those merchants. And so that request, I kind of penned it recently. And I asked for three things. One, a description of the existing compliance program. What do they have in place to, around marketing claims? How do they train their employees or representatives? Your typical aspects of a compliance program. Number two, despite having that wonderful program, did this happen? How did you end up with an FTC or an alleged FTC violation despite your wonderful program? And then number three, what are you doing to never let it happen again? And for the most part, I've been pleasantly surprised with the responses, and some of them go in to explain in detail that a lot of what they're seeing are blogs. They have great training programs. One of the representatives on a blog makes this misleading claim or allegedly misleading claim, and they take immediate action to fix it, and they've ramped up. So all of a sudden now I have to actually deal with their responses and become the arbiter of whether that's good enough. And I think we're probably all suffering with the idea, well, this merchant might now be the better merchant. This might be the merchant that's already, found religion and has figured out how to managing their marketing claims better. Is this the time to actually let them go? And I think to Ellen's point, this is history already. Like whatever happened already happened weeks or months ago. And the question is this a better merchant now, or are their competitors the better merchants? And so we are making decisions on a case-by-case basis, but largely when they invest in the time and effort, and you could tell right away whether they have a good compliance program and whether they are vested in responding to you, that's pretty indicative of us wanting to keep them. The opposite is also true. Some of them just run and hide. They just don't have a good answer, and that shines through as well. Their answers are just defensive and angry and not helpful, and we terminate. Sorry, but there's the whole gamut of that. I will say one thing that's weighing very heavily on us is the first data enforcement action and the qual-pay enforcement action. We're looking and trying to figure out, how do we make these decisions? How do we make sure we're actually getting rid of those that are bad actors, that are actually intentionally defrauding consumers, as compared to those that are just having a glitch and they just need to make their way through a chargeback program. And so we're doubling down on chargeback volumes and trying to figure out why chargeback volumes might be increasing, what might have changed. Constantly asking, is this merchant worth keeping? So anyway, always an issue in the high risk sectors.
Okay. Barry or Dina, anything to add? I know you're not sort of the internal company's perspective, but I'm sure your clients deal with this as well.
I agree with what Javier says, but what I appreciate about what Javier says is I think you're looking behind the numbers to look without just automatically making decisions, which is, I think, real helpful, because I do think that some very legitimate merchants have gotten caught up in a spate of refunds, a spate of chargebacks, and they're still a legitimate merchant, still everything is okay, but understanding, I guess, the story behind the numbers is real helpful for a partner, that your processor becomes. So that's my takeaway, Javier, from what you just said. And I know that merchants would appreciate that, because unfortunately, as you all know, most merchant agreements allow for immediate termination. And if a merchant's hanging on by their fingernails to begin with, then being shut off, and maybe for a reason that would require that they be tossed on, put on the match list, is going to be problematic potentially for moving on. So I think what Javier, what you've said is pretty helpful.
Sure.
Okay. We had a question come in. This goes back to underwriting. And I want to pick back up our underwriting discussion for a minute, because it's a very good one, and challenging issues. But we did have a question. Somebody asked, could we give an example of what a good site survey substitution would be? So back on site surveys, which is always a topic.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal. And Google Earth is only one piece of it. I know that's used a lot. If it's, for example, a restaurant and you go on Yelp and see 5 reviews and the restaurant's 10 years old, that could be indicative of a problem. And then you look at the Google Earth and you're not seeing that they're really there, but they said they're 10 years old. This is a site surveys that will let you know there's fraud. If you've got hundreds and hundreds of reviews, they're all different, and you can see the restaurant, that's a great site survey substitute. There's also companies that can pinpoint within small areas whether that person is where they say they are, which is another way to be a partial site survey substitute. But really, it's a triangulation of information when you're not standing in front of the business. And I can see Barry wants to add something.
Yeah, there's all sorts of social media. There's lots of blogs. Yes, there's Google Earth, but I mean, there's good old, Dr. Google, and you can go in and see if the restaurant's actually doing business. Are they placing orders? Are they taking orders? Are they accepting cards? I mean, there's a whole host of things. And in addition to Yelp, there's also, like I said, there's a whole bunch of social media reviews, blogs, etc., that you can find out about it. Sometimes there's also, for example, in DC, we have a very active Washington Post that reviews restaurants constantly. And you can just do some fast research. Did the Washington Post review this restaurant? Is it available? Is it open? Is it delivery? So those types of things
There's Angie's List, which is another good one, right? So you can see what's on Angie's List. There's some doctors' lists and search engines that I'm not able to tell you exactly what they're called, but what I'm going to tell you right now is different niche searchable engines or pieces to them, or social media blogs or social media pieces to them.
All right. Don't forget.
In an industry, you're going to be in an industry or a vertical, make sure you understand that, and then pick that out and add that to your site survey substitute list.
Don't forget also the Better Business Bureau is still active, and you can look into that. There's also, depending on where you live, the Attorney General or the Consumer Protection Division, they keep a lot of complaints are very public. And so you can see if there's been complaints about that in addition to the Yelp or the Angie's List or the various other complaints. And you can even go, depending on, again, where you live, there are local chat rooms that you could just say, have you heard about X or Y, and see what comes up.
Okay, we're running
I'll just add
short.
one piece. Oh, sorry, Jim.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Ellen. I was just going to add. The only other thing I would add, I agree with all those are great options. It's just interviews. In other words, go forward with the same interviews that you might have had in person. You just have them online. You talk to them and you find out very quickly if they have sophisticated answers, how they're tackling some of our compliance and regulatory challenges, how they're meeting the network rules, what they're selling. I mean, basic refresh, but by interviews with the people that should know. And if they can articulate answer, that's a great indication of a merchant or PayFac that's actually getting the job done. And if they can't, it becomes very clear, and there's just work to be done. So interviews are a great addition, and you could do those with just like we're doing now, video chats.
Okay. In the short time that we are left with, one of the things, and I'm sorry, we don't have a slide for this necessarily. I will put up what I think is a somewhat interesting slide that can sit in the background. And we've touched on some of these things, but some of the, I don't know if you call them tricks or tactics, but used to get processing by a merchant who probably really shouldn't get processing, but the shell companies and the straw owners, and receiving approval to sell something different than what they're actually selling. We touched on that a little bit earlier and how that might happen now. somebody was able to get a merchant account to sell one thing and now decides they want to sell, COVID hand sanitizers with lots of claims. But so where I wanted to go was more so with the ISOs and sales representatives and sub-ISOs and what they're doing and how that really impacts, the levels up. There's multiple levels in our industry, of course, and things get pushed down from the banks and the card networks all the way down, but then also potentially pitfalls and troubles that are started at the bottom levels with some aggressive sales agents and things like that work their way up and become our problem. So one of the things in the first data case, which we'll talk about in much more detail tomorrow during the session, is really about setting policies and procedures to make sure that your sub-ISOs and your sales reps have policies and procedures so that they know what they're doing and what they're underwriting and how to do it, and making sure that they're not looking the other way on things and not trying to push something through the system when they shouldn't. But I know I'm not asking a direct question here, but I do think just some commentary from any or all of you on the importance of really monitoring those lower sales channels is important. And has anything in the COVID area changed what you might do there?
I'll go from my standpoint. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's the same. Yeah, it's the same. Monitoring is monitoring, and right. COVID just gives the bad guys a new product to sell because we've been lacking a new scam for a while, or a new product to get rich quick, and we've had coaching for quite some time now. So now we have COVID cures that will either keep you safe or cure you right away. And it's the same. If we're up at the top level, we need to monitor our ISOs. If we're at the ISO level, we need to monitor each agent. And it's not just always looking big picture, but making sure you're properly segmenting by sales channel, by MCC, there's just many different ways, and then that you can report up what you're doing. So the one at the top has to get to the minutia, but they have to make sure each level below is doing the proper oversight and properly reporting up.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, a financial institution that enters into an agreement with a processor is going to require indemnity from the processor and all people that are sub anything under them. So whether or not that's an ISO or a feet on the street or an independent sales rep or some such thing, they are all gonna the person who is hiring them or retaining them or otherwise responsible for them is gonna deal with the liability. And there was a couple years ago, I remember that there was another spate of those type. I specifically remember it was in 2016, and there was a whole bunch of TCPA, Telephone Consumer Protection actions, that because there was a rogue sales rep. And Ellen, I don't know if you had any. I mean, there was a whole bunch of lawsuits that a crazy or a non, if you will, monitored sales rep violated the TCPA, and who was responsible. And ultimately, it was the super ISO, if you will, who was the one that was sued because the ISR was, working under an agreement with that ISO. So, I mean, that's if you string of your liability.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. We look at everything on this slide as just outright fraud, and we attack it. We see ourselves as victims of it as well. So we have a financial crimes team, many of which are based out of the UK, that help us look not just at U.S. fraud, but like the global players. There's a lot of multinational fraud occurring where pieces of this are happening in different places. And we work with law enforcement all over the world. We file our SARs wherever we can robustly when we find these kind of real bad actors. And I do think there's some confusion. These are bad actors. People that are doing these are intentionally scamming and getting access to the U.S. financial system. Very different than someone that had a representative that made an excessive claim about making money. I think it's a whole different level, and we take it seriously, and we work with law enforcement with these folks.
Okay. Last question in our final 2 minutes. So very quick, do you think there's a greater role for some third-party review for processors and ISOs? I'm pulling this from the First Data case where the FTC order has mandated a third-party assessor who really needs to kind of watch over a very narrow channel for First Data of higher risk merchant types bordered by wholesale ISOs, but nonetheless, a third-party assessor who has Visa GARS experience and MasterCard review experience is there to sort of watch over the shoulder. Do you think that could be a greater role in the future, a practice that maybe other processing companies might want to or might be forced to adopt? Any commentary on that? Brief answers.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in, Ellen, and just I'll say I think that we already do that. We already have our own internal team that focuses on looking at our ISOs and PayFacs and other partnerships, and we are definitely doubling down on that to make sure that we are getting good visibility and executive dashboard type information about the quality of the work they're doing. So that's kind of our answer. Is we're going to handle it ourselves before someone tries to tell us we have to do it.
Good.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. I'm assuming that's already underway and in place from somebody who has good compliance programs, and having a third-party monitoring system. I don't know that that's going to be a new industry, because it's already included within the risk parameters that a financial institution should have in place.
Well, as I mentioned, it kind of brings it back to the very first thing I said, which is one of the things people are coming to us for is, hey, can you give us a review to make sure we're on par, that we're supposed to do? So people are realizing it, because there are some extra risks right now. But in the end, it's never a bad idea to have a third party come in and give you a quick fitness review and a double check.
Right.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I'm really appreciative of everybody. Thank you to the audience for bearing with us through at least my own technical challenges, although I don't think I've seen Javier move on my screen in quite a long time. But I appreciate everybody. I've heard you great. And thank you, panelists. This is a really great discussion. We could have talked all afternoon, but we'll stop here. Please join us again tomorrow. You all get recordings of this too, and you can replay it back, and let us know if you have questions. Thank you.